I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the seating chart. Too many wine glasses, not enough name cards, and my usual spot next to Charles Morrison, our biggest client, was suddenly occupied by someone else. Madison Hayes sat there like she owned the place, which technically, through her uncle the chairman, she kind of did. I'm Andrew Sterling, 49 years old, and I've been building industrial automation systems for 23 years. Real systems that keep factories running, not PowerPoint presentations that look pretty in boardrooms. Tonight at Gibson's Steakhouse in Chicago, I was about to find out just how much that experience was worth in the modern corporate world. Charles Morrison sat at the head of the table like a judge waiting for testimony. The man built Morrison Industries from a two-man machine shop into a $75 million manufacturing operation, and he didn't suffer fools gladly. Every nut, bolt, and production line in his facility ran through automation systems I'd designed, maintained, and continuously improved over our 6-year partnership. My seat, where I'd sat for every quarterly review meeting, was now 2 chairs down from Charles. Between me and the man whose factory I kept running 24/7 was Madison Hayes, our 31-year-old VP of Strategic Operations. MBA from Wharton, 4 years of consulting experience, and about as much hands-on technical knowledge as my coffee mug. Madison was a recent addition to our company, dropped in like artificial sweetener in black coffee. Supposed to do the same job, but everyone could taste the difference. She had that Ivy League confidence that comes from never having to explain why a $1.2 million production line went down at 3 a.m. because someone changed a configuration without understanding what it actually controlled. "This is a celebration," Madison announced to the table, raising her wine glass like she was christening a yacht. Our CEO, Preston Blackwell, nodded in that vague way executives do when they've already mentally moved on to their next golf game. I smiled, tight-lipped, wondering what exactly we were celebrating. Was it the 400 hours I'd just put in upgrading Morrison's legacy control systems? The $850,000 in annual downtime reduction my optimizations had generated? Maybe the 98.9% uptime record I'd maintained across all their production lines for 6 straight years, a record that put Morrison Industries in the top 5% of manufacturing efficiency nationwide. Before we go any further, let me just say, if you're enjoying this train wreck already, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Seriously, it takes 2 seconds and keeps stories like this coming. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. Madison had positioned herself right next to Charles, leaning in like they were old college buddies discussing homecoming weekend. I caught snippets of her talking about synergistic value propositions and optimizing human capital allocation matrices, which was impressive considering she still referred to our main server room as the computer area in meetings. Charles wasn't buying what she was selling. He gave her polite nods, but his eyes kept drifting around the table. Once, they landed on me and stayed there for a long moment. "Andrew," he said during the appetizers, almost casually while cutting his calamari, "you're still handling the integration protocols for the new Phase 3 expansion, right?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. After 6 years of working together, Charles never asked casual questions about technical matters. Every question had a purpose. "Of course," I replied carefully. "Final testing completed yesterday afternoon. All systems green across the board." He just smiled and took another bite. "Just checking." Madison cut in faster than a safety relay protecting a $1 million machine. "Actually, Charles, we're transitioning responsibilities as part of our organizational optimization initiative. Andrew's done phenomenal work, obviously, but we're moving toward a more agile delivery framework with fresh perspectives on our technical leadership paradigm." Translation: Madison was trying to box me out and take credit for systems I'd built from the ground up, debugged at 2 a.m., and continuously improved for over half a decade. Preston said nothing. Not surprising, he'd stopped noticing me once Madison started calling him Preston instead of Mr. Blackwell, and filling his calendar with strategic alignment sessions where we used to have 15-minute problem-solving conversations. I nodded politely and turned back to my plate. I'd seen this corporate theater before, the slow squeeze out, the gradual erasure of the guy who actually knew how things worked, while someone who spoke fluent buzzword bingo got the handshakes, bonuses, and corner office recognition. But here's the thing about building automation systems for 23 years. You learn to plan for every conceivable failure mode. Last month, I'd started noticing my access permissions being quietly downgraded. Nothing dramatic or obvious, just little things that someone not paying attention might miss. Access to the backup monitoring dashboard suddenly required special authorization, my name mysteriously absent from the latest technical documentation updates. The weekly system reports that used to copy me automatically now went only to Madison's streamlined distribution list. I'd bet my entire pension fund that was Madison's brilliant idea, probably pitched to Preston as eliminating redundancy in our information architecture, or some equally meaningless corporate speak. The smart move would have been to raise hell about it, file a complaint with HR, demand a meeting with Preston to discuss the obvious attempted marginalization of a senior technical resource. Instead, I made detailed notes. And backups. Lots and lots of backups. Tonight felt like the culmination of a strategy Madison had been executing for months. HR mysteriously absent from what should have been a major client celebration. Dinner. No other senior engineers invited to what was supposedly a team recognition event. Just me, Madison, Preston, and a client who kept glancing at me like we shared a secret. Maybe we did share a secret because Madison didn't know about several things that were about to become very relevant to her career prospects. She didn't know about the coffee meeting I'd had with Charles's operations director, Janet Phillips, 2 weeks ago at a little diner 20 miles outside the city. She didn't know I'd built a completely independent deployment system under a technical services clause buried in Section 12.4 of our original contract, a clause their legal team had approved but apparently never explained to Madison. And she definitely didn't know what was going to happen when the main course arrived. The salmon hadn't even been served when Charles leaned back in his chair and said, "Andrew, I've got to ask you about those cascading fail-safe protocols you designed for our new production line. My operations team mentioned they're what prevented a complete shutdown during that power surge we had last month." I set down my water glass carefully, recognizing this wasn't small talk. Charles Morrison didn't make casual conversation about technical details, especially not at dinner. Every word was calculated. "The automatic load transfer system," I replied. "Yeah, when the main power fluctuated, the backup generators kicked in within 0.3 seconds. The production line never even registered the interruption." Charles nodded slowly. Janet ran the numbers. "That system saved us approximately $340,000 in lost production time and potential equipment damage." That wasn't a casual comment. That was a man who'd done very specific homework and wanted everyone at this table to understand exactly what value looked like in dollars and cents. Madison jumped into the conversation with all the grace of a forklift in a crystal shop. "Oh, absolutely. Our engineering team has been working on enhancing those architectural paradigms. I've actually got some really exciting innovations I'd love to show you that optimize our risk mitigation matrices and improve our overall system resilience frameworks." I had to take a sip of wine to keep from laughing out loud. The only thing Madison had been optimizing was her ability to use 5 buzzwords where one actual solution would do. Her innovations came from Harvard Business Review articles and LinkedIn thought leadership posts. Charles didn't even acknowledge she'd spoken. He just took another bite of his appetizer and asked me directly, "How's your team handling the timeline for the Phase 4 expansion? That's the automated quality control integration, correct?" "All integration testing completed yesterday," I replied. "We ran 72 hours of continuous simulation testing, 0 failures, 0 false positives. The system's ready for production deployment whenever you give us the green light." Charles smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. "Outstanding. That's exactly what I like to hear." Madison tried desperately to reclaim control of the conversation. "Yes, and as part of our strategic restructuring initiative, we're implementing a more collaborative approach to project ownership. We're moving away from that outdated single point of failure methodology and toward distributed leadership matrices." Single point of failure. She was talking about me like I was a software bug that needed patching rather than the guy who'd personally prevented actual failures for 6 straight years. Charles swirled his wine thoughtfully and said, very quietly, "In my business, I've learned that reliability comes from knowing exactly who to trust when the lights go out at midnight and the production line stops running." There it was. The line drawn in the sand, delivered with the calm authority of a man who'd built his company by understanding the difference between people who talked about solutions and people who delivered them. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Janet Phillips, Charles's assistant, step outside to make a phone call. Janet had been with Morrison Industries for 12 years and had a reputation for being able to smell corporate nonsense from 3 counties away. That phone call definitely wasn't random. The steaks arrived right on schedule, and Madison raised her wine glass again like she was about to announce the discovery of cold fusion. "Before we dig into these beautiful steaks," she said with a smile that looked like it had been practiced in front of a mirror, "I want to take a moment to acknowledge Andrew's incredible contributions to this project." The entire table went quiet. My professional instincts coiled like a spring-loaded safety mechanism sensing dangerous pressure levels. "Seriously," Madison continued, her voice taking on that particular tone corporate executives use when they're about to deliver bad news disguised as good news. "This deployment has been a massive undertaking, and Andrew's done a phenomenal job bringing it to completion. His attention to detail and commitment to excellence have been exactly what this project needed." She paused for dramatic effect, like a magician about to reveal the trick. "And as we look towards scaling our operations and diversifying our resource allocation strategies, we'll be transitioning Andrew to exciting new opportunities within our organization post-deployment. This will be his final project as primary technical lead for Morrison Industries." She delivered that last sentence with the same cheerful tone someone might use to announce a new flavor of ice cream in the company cafeteria. Preston barely looked up from cutting his steak. He just nodded like this decision had been penciled into his calendar for weeks. I caught Charles's eye across the table. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't speak. He just pressed his napkin to his lips and stared down at his plate like it contained the answer to a very important question. "Of course," Madison chirped on, completely oblivious to the tension she'd just created, "we're really excited about the fresh perspectives and innovative approaches our new technical leadership team will bring to the table. Andrew's been such a gracious professional during this transition period, a real team player." Team player. Corporate speak for shut up and disappear quietly while we give your job to someone who costs less and complains less. I smiled tight enough to crack dental work and said simply, "Understood." No pushback, no dramatic scene, no emotional outburst that Madison could later spin as Andrew didn't handle the transition professionally. I just cut into my steak, perfectly medium rare, probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill, and let the silence do all the talking. Charles finally broke that silence, his voice flatter than a factory floor. "Who exactly is taking over the technical oversight responsibilities?" Madison launched into her prepared answer like she'd been waiting for exactly this question. She rattled off a collection of names, mid-level managers and recent engineering graduates with impressive degrees and approximately zero experience with the specific industrial control systems that kept Morrison Industries running profitably. "Kevin Patterson from our Emerging Technologies division will be the new primary liaison," she said proudly. "He's got tremendous experience with cloud-based solutions and agile methodologies. And Sarah Parker from our systems integration team will handle the day-to-day operational oversight. She's really excited about implementing some innovative optimization protocols." I knew Kevin Patterson. Nice kid, smart enough, but his tremendous experience consisted mainly of configuring software dashboards that looked impressive in demonstrations, but had never been tested under the pressure of a real manufacturing environment where a 10-minute system failure could cost $50,000 in lost production. Charles didn't respond to Madison's personnel announcements. He just reached for the salt shaker like the conversation bored him to tears. I checked my watch. 8:47 p.m. Time to start wrapping up this performance. "Excuse me," I said to our waiter as he passed by our table. "Could you box up whatever dessert you'd recommend? I need to head out a bit earlier than planned tonight." Madison perked up like a dog hearing a can opener. "Is everything okay, Andrew? Nothing urgent happening, I hope?" I shrugged with practiced nonchalance. "Just some final documentation I need to finish up before tomorrow. You know how it is. Crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's before a major transition. That wasn't technically a lie. What I needed to finish was transferring my access credentials, backing up the complete system architecture documentation, and activating the independent deployment infrastructure I'd been quietly building for the past 3 months. Ever since Madison first used the phrase legacy personnel optimization in a meeting where she thought I couldn't hear her. The rest of dinner played out like a wake where the corpse kept trying to participate in the conversation. Charles said maybe 20 words total. Preston made awkward small talk about his golf handicap and some charity fundraiser his wife was organizing. Madison filled every silence with corporate buzzword soup about momentum optimization and strategic paradigm shifts while methodically demolishing her chocolate cake like it had personally insulted her MBA thesis. When the server brought dessert menus around the table, I was the only person who actually ordered anything. Apple tart, I told him. And could you box that up to go? Thanks. Madison leaned back in her chair and raised her wine glass one final time, like a general saluting troops before sending them into hopeless battle. Here's to new chapters and exciting opportunities for everyone. I didn't raise my glass. Instead, I lifted my water and said, to clean endings and honest work. She laughed like I'd made a clever joke, completely missing the fact that I wasn't joking even slightly. Charles finally broke his extended silence as our plates were being cleared away. Andrew, I assume you have the complete deployment configurations and system documentation readily accessible? I paused for exactly one measured beat, long enough to let the question hang in the air, short enough to avoid seeming evasive. Everything's on my development system, yes. Final validation protocols completed at 4:30 this afternoon. All integration tests passed, all security protocols verified. Charles nodded once, a sharp motion like a judge gaveling a verdict. Excellent. That single word carried more weight than Madison's entire 20-minute presentation about organizational optimization frameworks. The table went dead quiet except for the soft jazz playing over the restaurant's sound system and the distant clatter of kitchen staff cleaning up from the dinner rush. Madison stared at both of us like she was watching a conversation in a foreign language she didn't quite understand. Preston scrolled through emails on his phone like he was desperately waiting for this dinner to release him from his corporate obligations. I folded my napkin with deliberate precision and placed it beside my empty water glass. This dinner had started as Madison's carefully orchestrated victory celebration. Now it felt more like the opening ceremony for a completely different kind of event. I excused myself before the boxed apple tart arrived, pressing my phone against my ear like I was taking an important call. Madison waved me off with the casual dismissiveness you'd use for a delivery driver you'd already tipped. I walked past the wine display and the unnecessarily pretentious hostess station until I found a quiet alcove near the restrooms. No security cameras, no other diners, just soft lighting and the kind of acoustic privacy you need for sensitive communications. I pulled out my phone, opened an encrypted messaging app that most people don't know exists, and typed exactly 4 words. Green light. Execute now. Then I powered the phone completely off. Not airplane mode, not silent, completely off. Because the moment that message reached its destination, a carefully constructed backup system would activate, and my role in this particular corporate theater production would fundamentally change. When I returned to the table 5 minutes later, my boxed dessert was waiting next to my chair. Charles's plate was completely empty. Janet Phillips was nowhere to be seen, which meant she was probably outside making the phone calls that would matter more than anything discussed at this dinner table. Madison looked up with what she probably thought was genuine concern. Hope everything's okay with your call. Everything's perfectly fine, I replied, settling back into my chair for the final act, just making sure all the right people have all the right information. She had no idea how true that statement really was. Madison tried to fill the awkward silence with more corporate cheerleading. We should definitely set up a comprehensive transition meeting next week. Walk through all the handoff protocols, make sure the knowledge transfer goes smoothly. I want to ensure our new team has everything they need to maintain the excellent service standards Morrison Industries deserves. If there's anything to transfer, I said quietly, taking a sip of my coffee. That made her pause mid-gesture, wine glass halfway to her lips. What do you mean by that, Andrew? I didn't answer immediately because right at that moment Preston's phone buzzed once, then Madison's phone buzzed, then both phones buzzed again in rapid succession, like some kind of electronic Morse code announcing that the world had just shifted on its axis. Charles reached into his briefcase with the deliberate precision of a surgeon and pulled out a thick manila folder. He set it on the white tablecloth next to his empty wine glass like he was laying down the winning card in a poker game that had been going on for hours. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The soft jazz kept playing, but somehow it felt like even the restaurant's background music was holding its breath. And somewhere across Chicago, in a secure server facility that Madison didn't know existed, a backup deployment system had just switched from standby mode to full operational status. The apple tart sat completely untouched when Charles set down his coffee cup with surgical precision and turned toward me like he'd been waiting all evening for the restaurant to finally quiet down enough for serious business. "Andrew," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a machinist's tool through soft metal. "Those deployment configurations we discussed, they're accessible on your system right now?" The air pressure in the room seemed to change. I set down my napkin and met his gaze directly. "They are. Fully validated last security update. Pushed at 6:45 this evening. All systems showing green across every metric that matters." Madison gave a nervous laugh that sounded like a car engine trying to start in cold weather. "Well, obviously we have everything mirrored on our internal systems. The engineering team has been preparing the official release package for next week's scheduled deployment." Charles raised one hand, palm flat, like a traffic cop stopping oncoming traffic. "Outstanding. Let's deploy it tonight at my facility." He stood up from the table in one fluid motion. No theatrics, no dramatic announcements, just the quiet authority of a man who'd made a decision and saw no reason to debate it with people who weren't qualified to understand the implications. Madison's fork hit her dessert plate with a sharp metallic sound. "Wait, what? You want to deploy tonight? As in right now, this evening?" Charles smoothed his jacket and checked his watch. "Is there a technical reason we shouldn't?" "Well, I mean—" Madison stammered, her corporate confidence suddenly evaporating like coolant from a cracked radiator. "The transition protocols haven't been finalized yet. Our legal department needs to review the handoff documentation. And technically the deployment environment is still under our firm's operational jurisdiction until the formal change management procedures are—" Charles didn't let her finish. "I have final deployment authority under Section 4.2 of our Master Service Agreement. The system's been validated, Andrew confirms it's ready for production, and I'm authorizing immediate implementation." He turned to me with the kind of look a plant manager gives his most reliable maintenance supervisor when the main production line goes down. "Shall we go make this happen?" I stood up without hesitation. No victory dance, no smart-ass comments, no theatrical gestures. Just the calm professionalism of a man who'd been building systems that worked for 23 years and wasn't about to stop now. Madison scrambled to her feet like someone had just announced a fire drill. "Andrew, wait. This isn't standard procedure. I mean, our team should definitely be present for any major system deployment. At minimum, one senior project manager should oversee—" Charles looked at her the way a factory owner might look at someone who just suggested he run his production schedule past the local book club for approval. "You're not needed," he said, with the kind of finality that doesn't invite follow-up questions. Janet Phillips appeared beside him holding his coat and that manila folder I'd been wondering about all evening. She handed both items to Charles without saying a word, then positioned herself between Madison and the exit, not blocking her exactly, but making it very clear that this conversation was over. Madison reached toward me with something approaching desperation. "Andrew, if this is some kind of misunderstanding, we can work it out. Let's just sit back down and discuss the proper protocols for—" I looked at her with what might have been sympathy if I'd had any left to spare. "Madison, you said it yourself. This is my final project as technical lead." Her face went the color of printer paper. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant it was a transition to bigger opportunities within our organization." "I know exactly what you meant," I said, and headed for the door. Charles gave a small nod to Janet, who somehow managed to be everywhere Madison wanted to go without actually blocking her path. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Other diners were trying not to stare at what was obviously some kind of corporate drama unfolding at the corner table. Charles held the door open like I was the most important client he'd ever had. Outside, the Chicago air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of impending change. A black car was waiting at the curb, engine running. "After you," Charles said. I got in. He followed, and the door closed with the satisfying sound of precision engineering doing exactly what it was designed to do. As we pulled away from Gibson's Steakhouse, I glanced back through the rear window just in time to see Madison burst through the restaurant doors, phone pressed against her ear, gesturing frantically at our disappearing taillights. She'd finally realized that the system she thought she controlled had just left the building, and I was taking it exactly where it belonged, with someone who understood the difference between managing systems and actually making them work. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the Morrison Industries parking lot. Charles led me through a side entrance to his private operations center, a room I'd helped design but had never seen fully operational at night. The space hummed with quiet efficiency. Monitors displayed real-time production data from every line in the facility. Everything was green. Everything was working exactly as it should, thanks to systems I'd built, maintained, and continuously improved for 6 years. "This is what $850,000 in annual savings looks like," Charles said, gesturing to the displays. "Every metric you see here represents something you either designed, optimized, or fixed when everyone else was in meetings." I plugged my laptop into the central console. The deployment screen activated immediately. Clean, organized interfaces showing system status, integration points, and the automated deployment sequence I'd been refining for months. "Here's what Madison and her team don't understand," I said, pulling up the deployment logs. "This isn't just software. It's 23 years of understanding how things actually break and building systems that don't." Charles watched the deployment process unfold. Automated testing, security validation, fail-safe verification. Everything completed in 12 minutes with 0 errors. "Outstanding," he said. Then he pulled out that manila folder from dinner. "Permanent consulting contract," Charles explained, opening the folder. "Direct relationship with Morrison Industries. No corporate overhead, no account managers, no strategic realignment initiatives. Just you maintaining and improving the systems you built." I reviewed the contract. 2.5 times my current salary, full technical authority, reporting directly to Charles. Performance bonuses tied to actual uptime and efficiency metrics, not corporate buzzword compliance. "You're not just changing jobs," he continued. "You're getting back to building things that matter instead of explaining them to people who don't understand them." I signed the contract. Charles's phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then smiled. "That was Janet," he said. "Apparently your old company just called our main line. Madison's trying to claim there was some kind of misunderstanding about tonight's deployment. She wants to schedule a meeting to discuss transition protocols." What did Janet tell them? "That all future technical communications should go through our new chief systems architect." He handed me a business card with my name on it. "That's you, by the way." We spent the next hour running final system checks. Everything performed flawlessly. Better than expected, actually, because the independent deployment had eliminated the performance overhead from their corporate monitoring systems. At 11:30 p.m., Charles's operations director called with the final production numbers. The new deployment had improved overall system efficiency by 3.2% in its first hour online. "That's approximately $45,000 in additional annual savings," Charles calculated. "Your new system just paid for itself in the first month of your consulting contract." I packed up my laptop and headed for the door. For the first time in years, I was leaving work with the satisfaction of knowing that everything I'd built was exactly where it belonged, with someone who understood its value. The next morning, I got a text from my former colleague, Kevin Patterson. "Madison called an emergency meeting. She can't access any of the deployment systems. It says everything requires your authentication. Preston's asking questions she can't answer. What happened?" I replied, "Nothing happened. Everything's working exactly as designed. Good luck with the transition." I never heard from them again. 6 months later, Morrison Industries landed 3 new major contracts specifically because of our system reliability reputation. Charles sent me a bonus check with a note. "This is what happens when you invest in people who know the difference between presentations and performance." Madison? Last I heard, she was explaining to the board why they'd lost their biggest client and couldn't access the systems that ran their most profitable contracts. Turns out, there's a difference between managing people and managing systems. Madison never learned that distinction. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I was too busy building things that actually worked for someone who understood what that was worth.